our first live event, so you are part of a special select group of folks to experience our events live for the first time. If you haven't heard the podcast, you can find it on techpolicypodcast.org. We're available on Spotify and your favorite podcast apps. We want to own your mornings. That's what they tell me. Anyway, they tell me that we need to own the mornings. So, in any case, welcome. So today we're going to have an interesting group of guests. Mignon Clyburn is going to deliver the keynote remarks, and then we'll have several speakers whose names are listed on the screen. AI. So, is it an opportunity for underrepresented communities, or is it a threat? That's the topic of our discussion today. I don't know if you are familiar with Yuval Noah Harari's book, Homo Deus, but you should check it out because it's what triggered me to focus this event around the future of AI and the future of technology. He's a little more pessimistic than others. But he thinks that folks who don't have the skills of the future and who aren't able to develop AI and create AI are basically going to become extinct. I think that's a little pessimistic, but that's his view. And so we have to think of creative ways to not just involve communities in operating this new machinery, machine learning, and implementing artificial intelligence. We also have to think about how they're going to create these new technologies. So we will move quickly to our keynote speaker, Mignon Clyburn, who all of you probably know. She really needs no introduction, but she is president of MLT Strategies, LLC. She's a former SEC commissioner. She was sworn in for her first term as commissioner in 2009, and then again in 2013, and she was acting chairwoman in 2013 as well. She was committed to closing the digital divide. She was an advocate for lifeline modernization, which assists low-income consumers in defraying the cost of broadband service. Prior to the FCC, she was 11 years a member of the 6th District of the Public Service Commission of South Carolina, and before that, she was a publisher of a family-owned newspaper. Without further ado, please welcome Mignon Clyburn.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and I'm back in DC, and I see so many familiar faces. A couple of you are smiling, so I guess we're still friends. But Joe, you definitely are friends, so thank you for the opportunity to join you for this inaugural breakfast in this beautiful building during this impressive week, during this explosive political time in history. There's one thing that I believe that unites each of us. There's one thing that we can collectively brag about. We can each say that we were there at the beginning of what has been dubbed the first industrial revolution. There are not too many people that can speak and brag about being on the cusp and living during a time of such monumental change. We are witnessing computing, processing powers that are explosive. All of this is beyond our wildest expectations. We're benefiting from that storage capacity power and access to knowledge that is exponentially expanding. We are constantly in awe as unlimited breakthroughs in an ever-emerging tech space. All of this is enabling artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, autonomous devices, especially those cars that I'm still kind of scared about. You might be okay, I'm still a little scared about. 3D and more. All of this is becoming increasingly sown into the fabric of our everyday lives. Small startups started by college dropouts and, yes, a few PhDs, have grown into economic behemoths in a fraction of the time it took those well-established corporations, some now defunct, to reach comparable economic milestones. And the innovation and demand fueling all of this has enabled notable rises in global income, improvement in the quality of our lives, and access to devices, services, and content never imagined just a few years ago when our primary communications needs were being met by a rotary device tethered to the wall. By the way, there was a telephone that you plugged into a wall. Some of you, one or two of you might not know about that, but that existed. It wasn't that long ago. It is hard to contradict what I think is one of the foundations for today's topic, that World Economic Forum report. We are truly living in an ever-converging, disruptive, technologically innovative time. But what that report also affirms, and I know you will agree, that if we're not vigilant, vocal, proactive, we will soon become what the forum chairman calls rollertax. And the quote-unquote wide-reaching socio-economic benefits of this fourth industrial revolution will be as limited for the majority of this nation as were the three previous industrial revolutions. Now, I know some people would argue with that predicate, but I contend today, and I want us to talk about that if we have time, that the three previous industrial revolutions did not net ubiquitous benefits for this country. Just look. No matter how mechanized, no matter where we evolve, no matter how converged we are becoming, there are more pockets of poverty than there are tech corridors. You can live in a hill or a valley or whatever, Silicon Ocean. There are still more pockets of poverty than there are technological Wi-Fi highways. No matter how dramatic, meaningful, unnecessarily each of those revolutions may have been, history unfortunately will affirm that measurable results rarely focus, and they even less rarely take place where progress is needed the most. Now, I had a conversation a day or two ago with my parental unit. You know him as majority with James Clyber. And he said to me very boldly that truly successful revolutions, which we have yet to see, happen when the results or benefits of these dramatic, forcible changes in a social order or a system are broadly applied. These dramatic changes, and yes, they have occurred, they are not equitably distributed. It's so inequitable until I put another syllable in it. And what is even more troubling, many of the benefits that derive from these revolutions, they have dissipated over time. And just think about all of these monumental changes. You've got roads and bridges and corridors being built. And after a few years, you rarely hear or you rarely see the benefits that were promised at the beginning, at that launch, at that ribbon cutting. So, to me, at this point in time, the conversation should surround, or we should consider dropping the R. Because I contend that we don't need another revolution. We should almost reject the title of a technological revolution. What we need is an evolutionary change. Because evolutionary change will get rid of and reject the norm of the previous three. They will recognize that when we talk about AI and all of these, next gen opportunities, that the communities that need them the most are the least likely to get the investment. But let me say to you, when you talk about 3D and other opportunities, who could benefit the most from a building or infrastructure being built in their communities? Who could benefit the most? And those who have the least. And those who have the least, as we know, that number is growing and growing and growing as exponentially significant as the computing power and all of the other benefits that you hear people like me when I was wearing my other hat speak about. That's the challenge. That's the reality of the day. And what we need to continually make the business, societal, and every other positive case for is an evolutionary change in approach, a disruptive mindset that will be inclusive, that will allow these benefits to be ubiquitous, that it will enable those regulators, lawmakers, innovators, and investors to take root and hold of our promise that we learned about and quoted throughout our educational times in school. When we learn about this great nation and its hope and its promise, that we will lift as we climb, that we will enable opportunities that did not exist for those of us who came here, voluntary or not. And so to me, if the conversation today, and if your posture does not drop the R, then we're wasting our time. Because the first three did not work for all. This one, where we're still at the cusp in so many ways, this fourth iteration has, with our help, with our input, with our feedback, and yes, with our push, has the opportunity to be legacy changing, ground building, opportunity enabling. Because the gaps that exist today, if you think they're right, they are going to be cameras if we allow ourselves to be swept up by the bells and whistles, by the rhetoric, by the robotic cultural nature that this has the opportunity to sweep us in. So Joe, I'm not going to speak long. I will be here if you have questions. But what I leave for you is something that I was taught, and I think it's just a part of our DNA. And honestly, I have to give some credit to the chairman of the Borough Farm. We cannot leave behind or disconnect ourselves from the human, the compassionate elements that make us a part of a great nation. Convergence, evolving, evolutionary change only truly comes if everybody benefits. And everybody will benefit if everybody weighs in. Thank you very much.
Before you go, we have something for you because it's such an inspiration, certainly with us. Such an inspiration. have Francella Ochillo. Francella is the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. Previously, she was the Vice President of Policy and General Counsel for the National Spanish Media Coalition. She's a digital rights advocate who is committed to expanding access for unserved and underserved communities in the West Carolina. Next up is Sean Perryman. Sean is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Policy and Counsel at the Internet Association. He's responsible for leading IA's policy efforts around artificial intelligence, diversity, inclusion, and innovation-related policies at the local, state, and federal level. Thanks for your sponsorship and support for this event today, Sean. And finally, Dr. Spriggs. Dr. Spriggs is a professor in and former chair of the Department of Economics at Howard University and serves as chief economist at the AFL-CIO, and you can read the rest of his bio as well. So if we could just have a round of applause for our distinguished panel before we get started. See, you're awake now. I'm awake now. All right. So let's just jump right into it. And let's do a historical perspective because I'm really concerned about, and a lot of people are concerned about where this fourth industrial revolution falls within the context of previous industrial revolutions that have been exclusive and have perpetuated a lot of disparities that we've seen since the beginning with the founding of the United States. So this first question is directed to Dr. Spriggs. Can you give us a sense of sort of the previous industrial revolutions and then kind of define what characterizes this fourth industrial revolution that we're ostensibly in now? And do you see AI as constructive or destructive, a combination of both? What's your take?
So, sorry. I think Mignon gave us the right start because when you look at the previous revolutions, this one is actually dull by comparison. When you think of the transition from the 19th to the 20th century, I like to have people imagine looking at 1865, if you were in the Civil War, and then catapulted you to 1918, and you were in World War I. And just think of how shocked you would be if I transported you in that way. If you were a cavalry officer and you thought you were going to find a horse, you'd be sadly mistaken. You wouldn't understand we don't do that anymore. We don't have horse chargers. We don't have horses. You would be amazed that instead you were spending your time worrying about airplanes flying overhead, and that people were able to talk from the ground to the pilot in the air. And you would be amazed that if someone got wounded, they weren't going to just chop off their arm, they were going to do an x-ray because they could find where the bullet was. You would be amazed if you went into Paris and looked at a movie, or went into an officer's tent and had them put on a phonograph. All of these things are things beyond anything you saw in 1865. They aren't even things that you could relate to. You couldn't say, oh, this is a better version of, oh, you are doing X, just better. You're doing something I couldn't have imagined. You're doing something I can't conceive. This evolution is really about doing things much smarter. But to say that you're doing something radically different, that's a stretch. To say that you're introducing something I haven't seen. But what's the deeper lesson? Here's the deeper lesson. If you left the battlefield in 1865 and went to 1918, you would go, I see all these black guys. Why are they wearing French helmets and speaking English? Because the United States Army is still segregated in 1918. I would see the 325th, which was a black battalion signal corps. These are black men trained at historically black colleges to do the technology of the day. They were in charge of splicing, intercepting German communication lines and putting up American and French communication lines. Did that get black people jobs when they came home with these skills in a country that was about to have telephones everywhere? No, it did not. So, what did they come home to? They came home to the red summer of 1919, when white people were running amok, trying to kill them for having fought for their country. So, I think we often are asking the wrong question because, especially to the black community, this is posed as if we are never ready, we don't have the skills. Oh my goodness, the robots are coming. These are the wrong questions. There's a deeper set of questions, and Mignon posed it, a deeper set of questions that you have to address about society in the first place before you leap to we're not ready. And in this specific case, the utter audacity to rewrite history. Remember the film Hidden Figures? Everybody gets hung up because they're just looking at the individuals and they don't really pay attention to what's going on in the movie. Artificial intelligence, we're going to use electronic computers to replace a whole set of women whose job was to use slide rules and adding machines to do iterative arithmetic because the computer can do it faster. Go back and look at the movie. Those women did not get displaced by the computers. Those women became the computer programmers, and a black woman was the head of programming, at NASA to do the programming for our space missions. We invented the freaking thing. And people want to go, oh, I don't know if black people do this. When someone intentionally rewrites history, like, when I told you about the 325th Battalion, and some of you didn't know so many black men fought World War I, when you rewrite history to write something out, that means you got another game going. What we have to do, exactly what Mignon said, exactly what she said. We have to shape the conversation. The conversation currently is being shaped by those who want to shape the future. If artificial intelligence means I don't need as many workers, just as in the 1960s and 70s, when we put in automation in our auto plants, that meant we didn't need as many auto workers, that meant auto workers were more productive. But we had a union to say to General Motors, to say to Ford, to say to Chrysler, if we're more productive, you know what? We get paid more money. No one in this discussion is having a discussion about, oh, we're going to be more productive as workers. So people are going to get paid a lot more money. You have to be suspicious of someone who's running a game on you saying, no, you're just going to get replaced. Well, wait a minute. Who says you get the profit? And to the point, a lot of what is going on is people using technology to disrupt us. And exactly what Mignon said, we have to flip the table. Because a lot of this is all about greed and rent-seeking, and we need public policies that disrupt them. We have accepted that somehow or another Our information gets to be the foundation of the wealth for Facebook. Our information. We're the source of their wealth. This has never happened before. Mignon runs a newspaper. She sells advertising in the newspaper. But her customers aren't the information that she's selling. This is different. They're selling our information. We said that's okay. When did we have a vote that said that's okay? They usurped it. They've assumed it. They feel they can claim it. They feel you can't make a claim. You can't file a suit and say, you're making billions of dollars off of my information. When you leave here, you're going to look at your phone. What did you think of the National Union building? All y'all know you're going to get this. It's going to show up. And when you do a search, right, and you check your Google email, you're going to see ads for National Union building. Do you need catering in Washington, D.C.? They're selling your information. You are the source of the wealth. So we have to think more disruptive than they do.
Thank you, Dr. Spriggs. And not to interrupt the panel, but I know Congressman Scott is on a busy schedule, and I know he wants to deliver some few remarks. Congressman Scott is a congressman from Virginia and the chair of the House Educational Workers.
Thank you, Joe. First thing we did when we took over was change the name back to Education and Labor. In fact, yesterday we revealed the portrait of our person, former chairman who didn't have a portrait in the hearing room, Adam Clayton Powell. And it was Education and Labor back then. It was Education and Labor over the years. The Republicans took over. It became the Economic and Educational Opportunity Committee. And they had to change the name again because the acronym was EEOC. So when they changed the Education Workforce, we took over in 06, back to Education and Labor, 12, Education Workforce, after 18, Education and Labor. Because there's so many issues that are so important. And Joe, I want to thank you for working with us. Joe's involved in a lot of work that we're doing in the artificial intelligence area and making sure that we're focusing the attention on those kinds of issues. Joe was with us when we reviewed the 2016 EEOC finding. They had a study of diversity in the tech industry, and they had a lot of findings. One, sectors overwhelmingly white and male, women earn less than men, and then the argument that there is a shortage of qualified female tech workers and people of color in the tech industry is not because of a lack of qualifications. In fact, we're finding that half the STEM graduates in the United States are not hired in STEM fields. So the jobs, and there are more people with STEM credentials than there are STEM jobs. So you can't say that the qualifications constitute the problem. In fact, it's discrimination, which is a problem. They called one firm and said when they switched to a review of applications in a racially anonymous way, they scrubbed out all the racial identifiers, racially identifiable names, and just looked at the qualifications. The callback rate increased 20 to 60%. So we know what's going on here. They cited a report, a body of research that showed that black Hispanic and women are leaving the field in droves because of a hostile work environment. And so we followed that up with a 2017 GAO report. They found pretty much the same thing, that women, Asian, Hispanic, and black workers hold low levels of representation in senior management positions compared to those where they're supposed to have a pipeline. Well, people don't get through the pipeline. It's not getting better. The number of blacks in the tech field is about the same as it was, or worse than 10 years ago. And we know, again, they try to explain that it's the qualifications, but we found that many of the tech jobs do not require a STEM degree. Only about a third of the technology workforce has, in fact, a technology degree. A third don't even have any degree. So that even if there were a problem in the technical tech area, you can't explain the other 2/3 of the workers and why they're not represented. Now, we'd like to talk about some of the other implications. We know that we're going towards an artificial intelligence workforce, and it's extremely troubling to have so few people of color actually in the field, because when you start doing these algorithms, if you're not racially and gender sensitive, you're going to have some algorithms that don't work. We found that in facial recognition, where the number of false positives for African Americans and Asians is way off the chart compared to others. And that's because the algorithms weren't fixed to notice that. In Congress, we're not just talking about the problem, we're talking about solutions. We've had many hearings, and Joe's been part of them, in terms of doing something about it. There are a lot of particular issues in this area. One involves what we call the social contract for work. What does it mean to be an employee? This debate is timely today because California is about to pass a law that makes Uber drivers employees. Frankly, that's complicated with Uber drivers because some of them have Uber and Lyft open at the same time. And so if there's a violation of minimum wage, who do you hold accountable? So minimum wage and overtime are issues that apply to employees, not independent contractors. Whether or not you're entitled to employer-provided health insurance, unemployment compensation, workers' comp, if you have an accident driving a car, on the job, while you're taking the passenger clearly on the job, during the course of employment, are you entitled to workers' comp? Or are you an independent contractor, you're on your own? These are some of the issues involved in whether or not you're a contractor or an employee. And it's timely today because I said, like, California is about to pass legislation putting Uber drivers under that. And the Uber has already said that if you read the criteria, Uber drivers do not qualify as employees under their bill. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. The skills and competencies needed to to qualify for the changing nature of work and policies to avoid displacement, policies needed to make sure the workforce is qualified for the next round of jobs. All of that are things that we're working on, and we need to note that the role of this emerging workforce has implications, particularly in the area of civil rights. And so the AI is coming. Can't do anything about it coming, but we want to make sure that we are ready for it. Ensure that the widespread deployment of this technology doesn't cause more problems than they solve. And so we need to all work together to make sure that we address the challenges. We cure some of the problems we know we can solve, like the discrimination. There are a lot of other things that we're going to have to work together to make sure that the workforce we have is ready for the jobs of the future. So thank you so much for convening it. I know Mignon said all that needed to be said. So it's a pleasure to be here and look forward to the results of the discussion. Thank you.
So we'll move on. My next question is directed to Francella. You have a response. You have a response.
It wasn't really a response. It wasn't a retort or anything, but using the analogy of 1865 and 1918, I just wanted to point out that we're probably closer to the 1865 angle, right? We're the people in 1870-ish, right? So it's hard to say that this is, I would think it's hard to say it's a slow revolution because, take for instance, I watched The Wire again this weekend. You go from season 1 to The Wire season like 4 or 5. Season 5, they're talking about text messages, and they're like, whoa, that's like 2006, right? So we're in 2018 now. We have text messages. If I told you then that when you arrived in a city, you would call a stranger and they'd pick you up in their personal car and take you to where you want to go, and maybe you're going to someone else's house that they're renting out that you got on your phone. That would all be, you couldn't imagine that economy, but that's our normal day. That's maybe 5 to 10 years from now. So I think when we think about this revolution as how it's happening, the war field is obviously very dramatic, but the economy, the way it's changing, is completely shifted. And we're having these discussions.
Yeah, but you can explain, I totally understand text message. It's not revolutionary. It's not the same thing as there's a machine in the air. That's totally different. That's totally different from watching a motion picture when I've never seen a picture move. That's a different universe. Text message are just a more efficient way of you sending me messages already. Those of us who are older had pagers. So that's a better pager.
Well, when we look at the opportunity, when we look at what technology that will be available and what our children are going to be working on,
Because if you're talking about 1918, I mean, look at the time difference between 1865 and 1918. If we're at the beginning of this, we're just getting computing power and the mass data to get the AI to where it's at now. And we're at the front end of this 50 years from now, we may be in that universe is what I'm saying to you, that we may be looking up at the sky if we were transported in and saying, what is this? How do I get from place to place now? I'm just saying we cannot tell. If we look at the same time gap that you're giving us, like 1865, 1918, I think we're on the earlier end of this thing.
but I think it was to provide context similar to when we were in a building that was built in the 1890s, so people were in here partying. There's a speakeasy downstairs too during that time, so it's just kind of interesting for context. But turning to you, Francella, what are some of the key issues that you see facing communities in cities when it comes to AI?
So I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit about my organization, and this is something that's very new for them to be thinking about actual social impact. Next Century Cities is a bipartisan, neutral organization. We represent cities across the country and 43 states, all the way from Hawaii across to Maine. That means that we are very geographically as well as demographically diverse. But I think that one thing that's really important is that we're always thinking about how, when we talk about how certain things affect certain communities, that doesn't mean that there is an assessment of blame or shame that should be associated with that. And I think if we can pull some of the blame and shame out of it, we can get down to the nitty gritty and really having the bravery to ask for really difficult statistics and numbers and who and what is impacting certain people's outcomes. Now, I'm going to take off my Next Century Cities hat and get down to business. There are a lot of things that I think are beautiful about AI, and I sincerely think that this is something that it's an exciting time to be a part of a digital society. It's exciting to be in policy where we can help at least shape what it's going to look like in decades to come. When I think about the promise that it has in different cities, I think about how it's going to decongest traffic because it has sensors in the road. I think about not just about autonomous vehicles, but actually rethinking our transportation models and actually also making buses and trains not only something that is available to the public, but something that is an essential public good because it's something that transports people in revolutionary ways. And you can find out, yes, my bus is coming in 2 minutes, and if I stand here, that's really exciting because that just was something that we never imagined 20 years ago. However, I think with that promise comes great responsibility for us to think about who is actually going to benefit from some of the things associated with AI. I think that when we come to talking about police technologies and especially surveillance, I think that it's important to ask really hard questions. In my experience talking to cities, I find out a lot of the time that even when it comes to things like facial recognition or police body-worn cameras, there is no malice or any sort of malicious intent about who it's going to harm. But the truth is that since body-worn cameras have been put on police, traditionally it's actually increased the amount of people of color who are unconstitutionally detained. So it's backfired. So the thing is, while it was meant to be something for safety, it's really had very serious repercussions for people of color. Now, why should that matter if you're not a person of color? I think we need to start thinking about something that Commissioner Clyburn said earlier today about even changing the way that we're thinking about this and evolving even our own thinking. Because I think sometimes when we think about communities of color, and maybe if you aren't a community of color, it's like, it's not really my problem, things are good for me, that doesn't happen in my neighborhood. I get those comments all the time, especially when I go to neighborhoods that don't have a lot of diversity. They're like, we don't deal with those issues here. But we have to be able to make the case, whether it's an economic case, whether it's if my neighborhood next door is run down, this affects your home values too. Whether that's in my zip code, this is what the crime rates are looking like, and that affects your zip code as well. Whatever that argument that you need to make sure that we're bringing people in the perimeters, like bringing them into that conversation, that's really important that we do that, because I think we're constantly thinking about how something affects the others, and the truth is that with the browning of America, we all essentially belong to each other, and it's going to be harder and harder to divide who's the other. So I think that it's just really important, number one, to think about evolving our thinking and maybe changing our posture, and then also even thinking about being able to articulate, what do you want? So not necessarily just what are the harms, but to be able to say, okay, well, what do you want out of that technology? To be able to tell whether it's cities or even companies, this is how we want you to do better, and this is what we see in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, to your point about transportation, we had Malcolm Glenn from Uber on our latest episode 200, and he talked a lot about the fact that the benefits of Uber and Lyft are really going to folks in the suburbs, right? And so one of the goals of things like jump bikes and scooters, one of the goals is to offer micro-transportation solutions to folks in those communities. So that's just one way, that's just one example of really trying to be thoughtful about how we're using new technologies to apply them to solve entrenched transportation problems. There's a New York Times article talking about how a lot of that was, the highway system was based on segregation. So it's just interesting to see how the technology can actually be used in a way that makes sense for our communities today. Sean, Mr. Perryman, how does the internet sector look at the fourth industrial revolution? Does we could call it that? What's your perspective?
Call that often, but I think they understand that this is something that's disruptive, revolutionary in some ways. But I think when we think about artificial intelligence, at least lately the conversations that I'm mostly in are the questions about, is there bias? There is bias, and how do we combat bias? How do we mitigate bias? I said this before, when we thought about the future, we thought about artificial intelligence and the movies that we look at, we didn't imagine a future that was, just more efficient discrimination. That's not what we want. And we have to be mindful that the algorithms that we're doing, when we're talking about, hiring practices, or we're talking about who gets to loan and who doesn't, it's using historic data. That's the problem, that we're in a discriminatory society. And now we're taking that data and we're acting like, it's kind of the problem I talk about outside of this. When you have the MLK speech, everything was fine after that. Let's take that data now and apply it to new technology. You have to account for that data. You cannot be a race neutral, I don't see color type of company working with this sort of technology, or else you're going to run into a problem. So I think when we think about this, we think about, okay, how can we provide new technology, better services for people, but do it in a way that isn't discriminatory. And they don't always get it right. But I think that we're having these conversations now, and people are acutely aware that this is an issue that we're coming in. And when we talk about smart cities, one of my biggest concerns with smart cities is the data divide. If you are of a high income and I don't know how many people have smart watches in here. If you can go, there are people who go into their home and they have smart watches, they have temperature control settings, their whole house is connected, and there's so many data points from that person from the time they're born, and a smart hospital to the time they get home. If you're living in an impoverished neighborhood that may not have broadband, may not have the access to even give those data points, the only time that smart technology may interact with that is surveillance. So we really have to make sure that we are building smart cities in an equitable way too. That you're both seeing the benefits for all the community And part of that is that there's a lot of data that's given over voluntarily, as we talked about. You know, you're getting free services, but you're giving up data to do that. So how do we protect that? How do we do that in a more equitable way and make sure that we're building these cities where we're not seeing the same discrimination that we saw before in transportation and in financial services and in all those different areas?
I just wonder how that would affect the business models, and how much business models would have to change in order to address some of these operationalizing fallacies, I guess, that we're seeing take place.
Well, you are seeing a little bit of a different business model. A lot of the tech companies now, you know, we talk about the AI revolution, but now you're seeing human review added to the process because you're realizing that there needs to be a stopgap to analyze the data, and also you want your data to be clean data, right? So there's a bigger emphasis on human review of products, and we see that in AI, we see that in, when we talk about some of the social media platforms that are looking for, let's say, election security. They're looking for bad actors on their platform through machine learning and AI, but then they also have a human review as well. So it is changing how the business is done, but I don't know if it's disrupting in a negative way. I think it's just they're adapting to some of the challenges they're seeing.
I see.
But I think we need to be even more disruptive, because now we understand the value of the information we have all accepted in this model is free for companies to profit from. So much of what has taken place to this point has been disruptive from there are gaps in our understanding from a policy perspective and what needed to be regulated. And we've let the horses to decide where the cart is going as opposed to the driver. So I think the question about what does this mean for the model, for the business model, is deeper, as the congressman was talking about. Now we're reacting. Uber's idea that they could arbitrage labor regulation, many people are now fighting back against it. If your profit is based on arbitrage of labor regulation, no, the rest of us don't agree. And much of the negative view of what people think artificial intelligence is going to generate has really come from us allowing business models to run amok in terms of skirting rules, jumping over rules, and invading spaces that in the policy arena we hadn't encountered or hadn't thought about or had thought about but didn't think through enough how to recruit or correct the behavior. And so what I think we really have to guard against in this era is letting one small group dictate what the future looks like, including whether their business model makes sense for the rest of us. Apart from whether it makes sense for them, it doesn't make sense for the rest of us. And this includes high use of H-1B visa workers, when, as you heard from the congressman, it's really not that we have a shortage of Americans. This is the most segregated industry in America. The Washington, D.C. hub is as vital as any other because we're the home to the cloud and to internet security. This area has over 22% Black involved in IT. Atlanta, a similarly sized IT infrastructure, is 25% Black. How does Silicon Valley get to be not even 1%? They're telling you, I got to go all the way to India to find somebody. How is it in Washington where 22% and Atlanta is at 25%, and you tell me you have to go to India to find somebody? This logic and this ability for them to make these assertions is part of what has gotten the high level of inequality generated by this revolution so far, and our willingness, I think, as many had said, we're too into the bells and whistles and like, oh, wow, that's fancy. But no, bottom line we're still doing what other people did that we tried to prevent before. And that's the thing.
I would just, I don't know what the, or a couple points that you said a lot, but I would counter a couple points that you made here, because you're applying an old view of the economy to a new economy. So you're talking about labor laws, and I think we're having this conversation. I think it's an important one. We need to decide what's an independent contractor in the future. What does that look like? I think we need to have this discussion. But it's not a simple fix, because, like the congressman said, you have people who are on a platform who are using Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash all at the same time. We did not have a policy structure before where you were working for 3 different employers all at once, and that's impossible. And then how do you solve for that? So it's not just saying, oh, we have a full-time worker working for one person, and we're going to call them in.
No, because we.
I think Francella had something to add.
Yes, so a couple of things. So on just rethinking the policies for an older economy, I think that in general, we always need to be thinking about what, like, we can't envision what the economy is going to be like 50 years from now, but we need to ask really serious questions about the economy that we want today. Our addictions to social media also contribute to some of these business models. If people were outraged about the way that their Uber drivers and their Lyft drivers were, being treated, I believe me, they'd be online saying things. And some people are like when Walmart employees were talking about we want gun reform and we want you to change what you do. They started online petitions. They mobilized online and they demanded that their company do something different. So I definitely want to accept some responsibility for contributing to that ecosystem. My questions about whether or not our government is equipped to actually make decisions about policy, the jury's out on that. I think that our government is understaffed and overworked and short on new ideas. And so I'm not terribly excited about the way that things are right now, but I want us to think carefully about who we want to participate in our economy, who we value in society, because it's really hard to build a new system if we're not willing to acknowledge those really dispositive questions about building a new foundation. I think also when we're thinking about how this new business model is changing what's available to us as consumers, it's also changing how we earn. It's changing how much tax money is going to be contributed into the actual pool to be distributed back to citizens. There are so many far-reaching effects. So I want us to ask some really honest questions about what are we upset about? Who are we upset about not being included? Who's not being valued? When we talk, there's a couple of things I'm responding to. And the other point that I wanted to say is about when we're talking about who we want to participate in society, and we talk about, I don't want to just focus on African American communities. I am just completely upset every single time I go and talk about tech issues and don't understand why 50% of tribal communities are not in these conversations. Why aren't we talking about connecting more immigrant families and not just talking about either Mexican, Latino, Spanish descent, talking about the African descent, Vietnamese. There are lots of different communities that we should be talking about. So I don't want to muddy the conversation with there are so many things to do that we can't do anything. I just want us to ask really honest questions about who we want to be included in this economy that we envision. Because if we don't start asking hard questions about our values, we're not going to be able to make good policy.
This is really sort of an American diaspora at this point.
Right.
That we're ignoring. Questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
So to your point, and Professor Spriggs, I've heard you testify in front of the committee. I'm former committee staff, so I have that pleasure to see in person. But I wanted to kind of ask the panel, one of the ways in which I think we tried to make sense of AI policy in the committee was that we don't want to hamper innovation, because we don't want the future or the next technology that may be the thing that saves us to be stopped by a government regulation, and I think that's real. But at the same time, there are these things like civil rights laws, right? There are constitutional protections, right? And there are voting protections that we have that we want to maintain with AI, that we want to maintain regardless of whether AI is in the picture or not. And so I think this is a question to you all, is that I think of AI in the sense of civil rights laws, right? Are we allowed to have AI that's free of bias from housing, voting, criminal justice, employment, and credit transactions, right? And I know that all humans are biased in that way, but I think that that's something reasonable if this is math to be able, if you're just saying algorithms or math, right? What other ways in which can we kind of like frame this policy so that the benefits of AI go through equitably, but we also don't want to hamper the innovation because there is a race for this. And in the global context, we do want to be first. But also we want to keep the protections that we've fought so hard as an American people to maintain.
I think you raise a perfect question to put it into context, because we are not operating in a vacuum. China is competing with us in AI, and until recent investments last year, they were supposed to surpass us this year in R&D as well as AI. And I think you have to keep in mind the government and the culture that advances in this technology is going to shape how it's used in a lot of different ways that are important to keep in mind. But I do think you're right, we need to have these protections, and it isn't, there isn't one monolithic view in the tech community from industry on how it's used. There are people who are split on the use of facial recognition and whether it should be used. I think we have to take a risk-based approach to a lot of how we use AI. If you are giving an algorithm that is suggesting your next song or who your friend is, that is not as detrimental as are you this criminal, right? So we have to think about it in that way, and I don't think the problem with using government policy is that sometimes it's a one-size-fits-all approach. So I do think we need to step back and think about how we use this. We have to have protections for workers, we have to have civil rights protections, and I think that's possible using algorithms still. But we have to be careful that whatever policy approach that we take to it, it's not going to say all algorithms must do this, because it's not going to work. They're not using the same.
Well, I think it's the issue of the business model. And too often I feel that the tech community argues that it's their business model that's the innovation, and they have to have this. That's where I have a fundamental disagreement. And I don't think we need to concede their current set of models. If they had a more diverse workforce, then many of the algorithm issues wouldn't come up, because someone sitting in the meeting would instantly go, you just did a facial recognition that I'm a criminal. Like, how do you think this is okay? Not having those people in the meeting is in and of itself part of the problem. And so I don't think it's an either or when we ask them to behave. And I don't think it's an either or in terms of innovation when we ask them to find ways to short circuit what we had to go through from the last industrial revolution, because the last one generated massive wealth. And it took until the 1930s when unions finally made auto workers a good job, steel workers a good job, being a coal miner a good job, for us to redistribute all the gains from those advances so that we could move towards a more middle-class nation, recognizing that, you know, we still left some people out who didn't get those jobs initially. So I don't think it's an either or, and I fret that too often the response from tech is you're getting in the way of my innovation. I don't think rules get in the way of profit making. They just set the boundaries.
And I think one more thing to think about is that Sean said something earlier about when we were thinking about the economy, 20 years ago, you never envisioned somebody having 3 different jobs on 3 different platforms. Why can't we use AI to find out why certain people are working 3 different jobs? Why can't we use AI to find out, instead of designing, oh, this is going to be a great sentencing cocktail for you, finding out how can we turn that drug dealer into an engineer, because he's a great mathematician. So why aren't we using AI to do those types of things for public good, and finding ways to maybe, yeah, you know what, I'm not excited about what certain things tech companies are doing, but I want to say, you know what, if you're going to do this, maybe you can do this as well. And finding ways to actually use those applications for public good. And I think that's back to saying, what do we value? Who should be included? How can we lift them up? Even though I'm okay, why is my neighbor drowning? And so finding ways to rescue them. Because I think that we want to changing their outcomes and moving to different places. But the reality is, your zip code is a great predictor of your lifespan, how much you're going to have when you die, and if you're going to leave anything for your children. That is a great predictor. It can tell you how much capital that you have. It can tell you about how often these people actually get medical care, whether they actually get preventative care or emergency care, all sorts of things. And if we don't have data on those people, we have an opportunity right now to actually say, we want better numbers. We want more granular data, but we have to have the courage to do that because we in this room probably have 2 or 3 different ways to connect and lots of different data points, but are we using the ways that we can plug in to demand change? So are we calling our councilman or our mayor or asking our state reps to do better? So I think there are a lot of applications where AI can improve quality of life, but that will be severely limited by how much we actually demand that they do good.
If the drug dealers make more money as
I went to a speech and somebody who was a mentor, he said that when he's talking to his kids in his group, he's always trying to get them to see, he said lots of the kids in their group get arrested, and he said, I don't see a drug dealer, I see a great mathematician for the ones that are in businesses. So the thing is, this gentleman found a way to actually get young entrepreneurs in New York 0% loans to fund their businesses. And he partnered with the tech company to do that. And part of it is just because they were saying, look, these are the resources you have. I see resources in our community. You think that, I think sometimes we have to be able to see opportunity in darkness, where people view certain parts of our cities as them being either less talented, not as skilled, unemployed, just not as valued. And we have to be able to see beauty in that darkness and be able to say that those people are valuable as well.
Any other questions?
So maybe a question in the form of comment. And this is inspired in part with the doctor and Sean. To me, and I don't know if the cat's too far out of the barn or whoever comes out of the barn, whatever. To me, what this calls for, should call for, is a sort of a standard setting body for AI. And I don't think we have it, because we don't have to me, we don't have a baseline. You don't have the inputs of the people, in the development, in the room. You don't have, other protocols that would be certain baselines of, merit and morals and whatever. You just don't seem to have that. And things are evolving where they naturally are evolving based on, again, economic desire to be that next billionaire, and not necessarily over the commonality or the common platform that needs a foundation, that needs some type of protocols in place that will ensure that whatever is built on that platform is based on something that's palatable and equitable and the like. I don't hear conversations, unless I missed it, Sean, based on that, and I think that fundamentally, for me is a problem. One of the other things I want us to think about why this is so timely that I failed to mention is that when you talk about how ubiquitous AI and this conversation, how significant this conversation is, the way we fight, literally, the way we fight is being changed. Domestically and internationally, AI, on the surface, it may sound wonderful for us, and I'm on a certain AI board, so full disclosure, it might, and hopefully I can go back after I say this. It may sound incredibly wonderful for us to say, oh, we're going to use these algorithms to be more precise so we have more, or fewer casualties that are not, friendly, casualties that we can. But if you take, the more you take the human element out of that, and it becomes strictly algorithmic, or strictly, based on the machine learning, there lies the problem. You got the potential for some very precise and possibly inhuman decision making to be taking place. Those two things, to me, kind of on my spirit that I don't think we have a genuine conversation about it. It's got to happen before we go much further.
Well, but you described it exactly. People need to take a step back and understand what voting's problem is. that airplane was artificial intelligence that previously relied more on humans than on the machine. And here the machine was overriding the humans because it had a faulty sensor. And as much as we want to think that the machines are infallible, the machines rely on sensors. All of us have had our car give us a check engine light, and then you go and you check it and you find out it's the sensor. It's not that the engine had failed or anything else, the sensor had failed. In this case, unfortunately, the sensor had failed, but the machine couldn't correct for it. And we tragically lost hundreds of people. So I think, there's promise, but you have to step back about the human brain is still the most amazing computer ever. We are trying to figure out, can we design something as good as a human brain? And that's what trying to be deliberate about it.
And Doctor, I'm glad you said that. To me, the focus should be more on trying to scale what's strong here as opposed to trying to either improve or replicate. And that, as an individual, that bugs me the most. Sorry, I broke protocol, Joe.
But it's so like in this case, it's not that the machine will be infallible. It's do you believe the sensors are going to be more reliable than the human? And yes, an impaired human may be far worse than the best machine, but we haven't solved the problem of is the best human who is not impaired, still not as capable as a machine. And I think the jury needs to be out on it, and these are wonderful things. We talked about facial recognition, and understand that China is using this as a suppressive government to suppress. And as much as we would like to be in a race with them on some technology, we also have to be with the race on them on setting over the international norms. Because yes, they will market it, because we know there are suppressive governments who would love to be able to suppress better than they currently can. And we have to think about what are the rules we put in place over AI, so that it's not just a race to provide whatever somebody wants. And there is going to be a race, because China's view of how the internet should function is totally different than ours. It currently is. And as they roll out 5G with their technology, there's going to be a growing competition about who defines freedom of the internet. And there are going to be a lot of repressive governments who will want the Chinese version of the internet. That's another competition that's going on. So I don't think we can see this as something that we only want the AI community to give us answers to. This gets back to us, this gets back to the human element, and having policymakers understand this.
Some of the questions, just in terms of, is there a conversation going on about how those communities that are excluded on the outside, Native American communities, even inner city communities, or even in the South, where they are, in many ways, they're in a different world. And there are lots of organizations and people who want to help, and they come in, they collect data, they study, that we're going to help you. And I'm working with one now, and they are pushing back against community organizations and public interest groups coming in to collect more data that we can use. How can they use AI? How can the community itself, how can you get that to them? So that they are pushing AI, not just having AI something active about it.
I do, sorry, I'm not sure if this works anymore. It doesn't matter. So I think that one of the things that's important, oh, thanks, John. I think one of the things that's important is that we give people the ability to tell their own story. There is nobody who's a better teller story than you. And I think that if we actually make an intentional effort to show communities, number one, give them the data literacy and also the tools that they need to be able to actually understand some of this information that's being collected, be able to actually, whether it's manipulate, collect, however they want to be able to tell their own story, it makes it a little bit easier and palatable to actually communicate with people who they feel like are on the outside. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of communities that are essentially like digital deserts, where they just don't have a lot of tools or access, the truth is you should be suspicious of outsiders who come in because they will treat you like guinea pigs. And I think that we have to some extent, just accept that that's where people are, and rightfully so, but to make an intentional effort to put resources into those communities. And one of the things I've talked to cities about is about data equity, rather than just saying we're going to distribute resources equally and give the same thing to every community. Giving this allotment to one community that already has is not going to create equity for the community that is strapped. And so we need to be thinking about, maybe we do need to put exponentially more in certain areas to make sure that we bring them to the same place where they can have a legitimate conversation and a seat at the table to have conversations about whether it's bringing new technologies into their city. Because the truth is, when we talk about surveillance, they're going to be the first people to be targeted. When we talk about air quality control, I talked to one community, they put them in places where everyone had, I know that came up earlier, air conditioning, where they all had their own like nests and things like that. The people who already had benefited from that technology. The people who didn't have, they contribute to those taxpayer dollars, but they aren't necessarily going to benefit from that. So how do we actually find a way to bring them in a way that it isn't unfair, it's just the truth of the matter is some communities are under-resourced, and we have to acknowledge that, and there's no shame or blame associated with that, it's just a matter of fact. So once we can get aside from our feeling like you're blaming somebody for it, I think we can have an honest conversations about a needs assessment, and also to give them, to acknowledge that there's dignity in still being poor. Maybe you didn't start in the same place, but I think that's one thing that's very American. I'm first generation American, and I feel like people outside of the U.S. Have different feelings about being poor, but I feel like poverty in the U.S. is something that's cloaked in shame, like you didn't try hard enough to get out of your circumstance, whereas in other countries, a lot of the time people just accept that's where you are. And I think if we can take some of that shame out of it and just honor people where they are, it's so much easier to have a constructive conversation.
So 60-second closing remarks.
Sorry.
That's what I was
You can have my 60 seconds.
Let's take 1 minute and then we'll do closing remarks.
Oh, okay. It wasn't that. What I guess what I wanted to say was, when we talk about policy solutions for this, I think a lot of times we're playing whack-a-mole. Okay, what's the new business? What do I like about it? And then I'm going to try to structure this. I'm not going to call you by name. I'm going to structure it to come after you. But the biggest things that Congress and localities can do, we need federal privacy legislation. One, this is a data-driven society. We don't have enough restrictions on what it is. And I think, believe it or not, the tech industry wants to know because they want to know what rules or what boundaries are we playing in, right? So I think we have federal privacy legislation. But then when we talk about rural communities, empowered communities, broadband access, right? Treat this as infrastructure. This is something that only the government can do because there's no incentive. It's not enough profit there for people to come out and build broadband in those areas. So when we talk about trying to make it more equitable, trying to get AI on this, all of this is baked into things the government can do. And that doesn't even get into the education. It's really not teaching kids the skills they're going to need going forward for the future. So it's just something I don't know.
Thank you, Sean. And Dr. Spriggs, we'll just go down the line. Dr. Spriggs, closing remarks.
Well, Magnan's commission used to be in charge of one of those known policies, which was to make sure that telephone service was universal. And our current concept that we don't need to regulate industry has led to a sense that we can do away with understanding the universal access of the telephone that was essential for most of the 20th century as its analog today and broadband access. And there was a big fight over whether we could get universal as a dystopia that you are hearing has a purpose. It's to frighten us, to amaze us with the bells and whistles, and keep us from making the policy decisions we know are necessary, and that in the end actually benefit many of the companies that are just being greedy. And so I would just caution us not to have this capture. One of the downsides of these companies becoming so big so quick is that they are able to influence public policy to their favor, that in a way that wasn't there before. And Uber, to me, I keep picking on it, but for years, blacks tried to run jitney cabs because getting a cab to Harlem or to certain parts of the Bronx or certain parts of Brooklyn was always an issue, and we tried to get around it, but no one accepted that you get to do that. People understood you're violating the rules. Uber, somehow or another, because it had the money, got to argue we get to have jitney cabs. And everybody said, oh, this is different. It's not the same thing. It's the same thing. So, I think we just need to think through who we let bend the rules. Why are we letting them bend the rules? And let's get away from the dystopian future and start planning the positive future.
Sean and Francis.
I hope we're not arguing for cabs to come back, but,
I had trouble getting a cab the other day.
I like having a room because I can actually get where I'm going. But what I would say is when we're having this conversation, and I go back to how we began the conversation, we're really at the beginning. If it's 1865 versus 1918, we're probably somewhere in 1870. When we're really thinking through, there's been all this technology, all this innovation that's changing how we do business, how we travel, how our economy looks, and we need to figure out what's acceptable and what's not. What does our labor market look like? And I think we need to have those underlying protections for workers through civil rights, and we need to have those things, but we also have the opportunity to solve some of the problems that we saw in the past with the historical discrimination and stop it from leaking into our technology. This can be a hugely transformative technology. AI can be hugely transformative technology. It can be for good or bad. It really is on us. And the other thing that didn't really come up in the conversation is the kind of democratization of it. We're not all just, it's not all in the power of one person. A lot of these technologies is giving you the power to use their services to reach people for much cheaper. I can't run an ad on TV, but I can go on Facebook and buy a bunch of ad space and target exactly who I want. So we need to think about how that can be used in a responsible and ethical way. And I think it takes all the people in the room, both policymakers, the industry, and stakeholders to see what we want our future to look like.
Number one, I think that we need to really do some soul searching about who we believe is valuable in our society. It will change some of the policy decisions that we're making. Secondly, before you walk out of this room, I want you to think about what you can do to contribute to that. I think that we all have so much power in being able to change what opportunities people have, what opportunities they will have in the future. And I think a lot about, in my new capacity versus the posture that I had in my previous capacity. I spent a lot of time for the past 4 years knocking on doors and getting tech companies, congressional staffers. Some of you don't return my emails, so I show up in your offices. I spent a lot of time literally forcing my way into the door just so that somebody would listen. But the truth of the matter is, I don't need to hang out in those rooms in my current capacity, but I have a personal obligation to do so. Because there are so many people who don't even know what to ask for. And so I just implore all of you to think about how you can contribute, whether it's talking to your boss or asking your mayor or making some sort of demand from your company, because we all have power in this room. And then finally, I do want to say one thing about Joe. A few years ago when I actually met Joe, it was with the group that we have as policy advocates. I had no idea about Joe's background. He's actually relatively soft-spoken, really quiet, very focused, and all about the details. And so much heart goes into these types kinds of events, and also continuing the conversations that we need to have to literally empower communities that have no voice in these agencies. So I just want to thank you. In case that does not come up today, none of this work is in vain. And if one or two of you people in this room go out to do something, it was in part because of your leadership. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming, again, on our first event. Really a pleasure to have you here, and hope to see you, look forward to seeing you again. You can check out the podcast again at techpolicypodcast.org. You can find that on your favorite podcasting app. And thank you again. If we could have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the